Now that tomorrow had finally arrived and Deltarune released, I moved on to waiting for Silksong, and I began to play HollowKnight to cope while I waited. But as I fought old bosses I hadn't seen in years, a bit of a question began to form in my mind. That question is, when do you truly beat a boss fight? Okay, wait a second. Before we begin, I gotta say, thank you for 400 subscribers. I don't know who you weirdos are that like my stuff, but thank you. It means a lot. I gotta be honest, this video is a bit of unstructured ramblings while I work on something more substantial, but hey, stick around. But to get back to the original question, when do you truly beat a boss fight? Of course, that's a silly question. You beat a boss when they're no longer standing in your way, right? I mean, it might take a few tries, but after you beat them once, that's it, right? I mean, you've won. You can move on, and they're no longer blocking your path. And of course, yeah, you'd be right. You, the player, have defeated the boss, and by definition, you have beat them. But my question goes a bit further than that. What if you were to fight him again? Are you 100% certain that you would win? And if you're not 100% certain of your victory, can you really say that you've truly beaten the boss? With games like Undertale and Deltarune, unless you have some save point shenanigans, you won't get to fight the boss again, so most people don't fight the boss again, and that's perfectly fine. They're perfectly content with beating them once and moving on. But what if you look back? What if you were to reload a save before beating them and go at it again? Of course, with games like HollowKnight, you could defeat them over and over and over again until the chances of you losing are slim to none. Of course, if you do this, at some point the boss no longer offers any real challenge to you. You have enough certainty in knowing that at any point, should you fight this particular boss again, you will come out victorious. They can't offer the same challenge and feeling they once did when you were facing them. Or can they? You could impose some restrictions for yourself to make it harder. A weaker weapon, make them deal more damage to you, and suddenly you find yourself dying to the same boss you had no problem killing a few moments ago. Now, you could argue that this boss, the one with the self-imposed restrictions, is a different being than the one you initially fought. And I could be persuaded into agreeing with you. I mean, after all, the only reason you would impose these restrictions upon yourself would be if you've already beaten the boss countless times without issue. But if their attack patterns don't change, and the essence stays the same, can you really count them as a different being altogether? And if you can't count them as a different boss, but you can't beat them under these new restrictions, we come back to your original question. Have you truly beaten this boss? Of course, just like before, you can keep fighting the boss and beat them countless times until these restrictions too feel trivial. So you add new restrictions. A new arena. More. You deal less damage. More. No equipment. More. The boss one-hits you. And you keep going, adding more and more and more until eventually you're fighting the same boss with a Guitar Hero controller or beating the game blindfolded. But when does it end? If you can keep adding more restrictions ad infinitum, can you truly not beat a boss? I mean, does that mean I haven't truly beaten Frogget on the off chance that I died during a no-hit run while playing the game blindfolded with only my nose? Of course I've beat Frogget, it'd be ridiculous to say I haven't. And to say you haven't beaten a boss due to you not doing it under such niche restrictions would be silly, honestly. I mean, under this definition, only the person that has beaten the boss with the most silly restrictions has truly beaten the boss. And that's just not true. But all of this discussion allows me to segue back into talking about HollowKnight, more specifically, Godhome. Just bear with me a second, I swear this is related to the original question. Now, if you're not already familiar with Godhome and HollowKnight, basically, Godhome is a special post-game area where the game's bosses are kept. Here, you can fight them over and over again to your heart's content. It's essentially a gallery where you can refight all of the game's bosses as well as take on extra challenges like the Pantheons, which themselves are back-to-back boss rushes that you have to beat without dying and your health carries over between encounters. With the final Pantheon requiring you to beat every single boss in the game back-to-back without dying. I think it's great. More games should do this, low-key. Like, come on, how come after I beat all of Undertale I can't go back and fight Undyne the Undying or Malenia again without starting a new save file or turning on mods and file manipulation? But I'm getting off topic, back to HollowKnight. I had not played HollowKnight in a fair bit. Despite this though, I did feel confident enough to tackle some of the game's harder bosses right off the bat. And despite my many years of not touching the game, I was still able to beat them after a few tries. Albeit not with the same efficiency I had once been able to all those years back, of course. But as I continued to fight some of my favorite bosses, if only to get more footage for this video, What had once taken me dozens of attempts to do back in 2020, I was able to replicate after just 2 or 3 attempts even after all these years. I had truly beaten these bosses before, this much I was sure of. I could pick any one of these guys and I would have a pretty good shot at defeating them right then and there without any warm-up. The Absolute Radiance did show a bit of resistance, but once I put on my own music playlist, it was kinda over for them. However, as I kept going, I got a bit too cocky. I started trying to Radiant bosses again. And if you don't know what that is, basically, the boss gets extra health, you die in one hit no matter what, and sometimes the arena changes. It was going smoothly, until I got to Nightmare King Grimm. And to put it lightly, he started kicking my ass. Despite my muscle memory being there, I just couldn't seem to close out the fight, dying many times over and over and over again. And this is when I began to doubt myself. If I couldn't beat Grimm like this, had I really beaten him? I mean, I beat his Radiant version back in 2020, sure, but if I couldn't do it right now, was he truly beat? So, despite telling myself I had gathered more than enough footage for the short video, I just couldn't bring myself to stop playing. So I just kept throwing myself at the Nightmare King over and over and over again. And I just kept asking myself, why? What did I have to prove? Clearly I have beaten him before this, and if I didn't tell you guys just now, you guys would have no idea, right? I could just lie and tell you guys that I beat his Radiant version and you guys wouldn't know any better. But I kept at it until eventually I beat him. And again. And again. And again. And eventually, after enough beating Nightmare King Grimm on the street curb, I was satisfied. I felt good about myself and I just left. So then, I truly beat Nightmare King Grimm, right? At least his Radiant version. Well, I mean, if I go into the fight again, there's a pretty significant chance that I will lose. So then why am I satisfied with not fighting him again? Why do I feel confident in saying that I truly beat him again, even after all these years, despite contradicting what I just said in the beginning of this video? Well, that's because something finally clicked while I was fighting him for like the 11th time. And that something finally allowed me to answer my own question. But before that, let me ask you something. Why do we fight bosses in video games? Well, because they're blocking something we covet, be it treasure, the rest of the game, or an ability. But then, what was this guy blocking for me? I gained nothing from beating him up all those times. I simply wanted to prove to myself that I still could beat his Radiant version even after all these years. And by merit of him merely existing, he was blocking my way. And that leads me to the most important point of all this. Not everyone fights bosses for the same reason, and therefore, not everyone truly beats a boss in the same way. For many, they fight the boss simply to continue playing the game or get whatever game reward beating the boss gets them. For others, like myself with King Grimm, it's about proving something to ourselves. It's a personal challenge, a test of skill, even if that test of skill has no real reward. Maybe it can be more personal, a way to recapture that initial feeling of overcoming a monumental obstacle. I mean, we all have those memories of dying to the same boss over and over and over and over again, trying to beat them at least once. And when you finally do beat them, you feel euphoric. So people might fight the same boss with more restrictions as a way to try and relive that initial euphoria, while trying to chase after a high that once was, with various levels of success, I suppose. I mean, try as you might, I don't think you can really recapture the joy of when you finally beat a boss that has been kicking your ass for so long by doing something as simple as just fighting them again, even if you do add some restrictions to make it harder on yourself. No matter your reasoning, we all have our reasons to fight a boss. But just like how we all have different reasons to fight a boss, we all have different criteria for considering a boss truly beat. That's to say, countless players have managed to kill Nightmare King Grimm. But just because those same players didn't take the time to beat him on his Radiant difficulty, does that mean they didn't truly beat him as I did a moment ago? No, of course not. It would be unfair and pretentious for me to say that, as someone could just as easily invalidate my own achievement by pointing out the fact that I used charms and nail arts. So after Grimm, I kept fighting other bosses I liked. I kept fighting these bosses until I felt satisfied, and it was when I felt satisfied in my own abilities that I finally considered these bosses truly beat. But that's only me, which means that if someone else feels satisfied with only beating a boss once and never touching them again, that's just as valid a threshold to consider that person having truly beat the boss as any other threshold, such as beating said boss blind. Because the reason why I kept coming back to fight Grimm and all these other bosses despite getting more than enough footage for this video was the exact same reason someone would keep trying to defeat a boss for the first time despite losing countless times. I wanted something, and a boss was in my way. For me, That something was able to prove to myself that I could still keep up even after 5 years. For someone else, it could be as straightforward as wanting to get the reward or continue the game's story. Whatever different thresholds people have to consider a boss truly beat in their eyes, I am confident in finally answering my original question, even if the answer is a bit disappointing. So, when do you truly beat a boss fight? You beat a boss when they're no longer standing in your way. So, if you have a challenge you can't seem to beat no matter how many times you try, pick yourself up, go again. Because just like how you don't truly beat a boss until you're satisfied, you don't truly lose until you give up. So, as hard as it is, don't let yourself be truly beat.